Hey guys, big welcome back to our fantasy football endgame community. We definitely appreciate you joining us as always. I'm Pierre, he's Chris. We're going to get into our biggest busts for week 7, guys, that we're just not big on based on matchups. So let's start things off, Chris. Who are you fading?
I'm fading Devonta Smith this week against the Raiders. I talked about it in our boom video, which you should go check out after you watch this one. I had Dallas Goedert as a boom because Raiders, pretty good against wide receivers, terrible against tight ends. Also, my boy, Jalen Hurts, loves to target the tight ends, and Dallas Goedert's the only tight end there. So I think this is going to be another week where Dallas Goedert, I think he's going to have a big game. I think Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell will get some targets. They may not do anything with them, but they'll get some targets. And I just don't think the receivers like Watkins, Rager, or Devonta Smith will be able to do much in this game. So kind of like last week, Devonta Smith, he'll get a couple catches. He'll do a little something, but just not the type of game you want from one of your fantasy starters. I think you can keep him on the bench in week 7.
Yeah, new coach, new quarterback, and yet the Eagles still love to throw it to the tight end. Go figure. All right, so I'm going to talk about Geno Smith. We talked about him a lot last week. And look, he acquitted himself pretty well as a starter. Kept his team in it until the very end. If not for that very final play, unfortunate. But yeah, he did okay. But who didn't do okay was Tyler Lockett. And I did talk about this last week. I didn't go so far as to call Lockett a bust just because never know with Lockett. He can take one play to the house. But look, that connection between Russ and Lockett was special, right? That QB rating between quarterback and receiver. It's just not there with Geno, right? For obvious reasons. It's not the same thing with Russell Wilson. DK Metcalf, you can just throw it anywhere in his zip code. He'll get the ball, right? He can go up and do that. Tyler Lockett, not quite that easy. So what happened this past week, with Geno's first start? Lockett was targeted 7 times, same as DK. He only caught 2 of them for 35 yards. That's exactly what I was afraid of. That connection's just not there. Lockett, yeah, he does still have that, deep threat ability, but are we trusting the connection? I'm not. I'm actually benching Lockett if I have him. It's not a great matchup anyways with the Saints. Saints do have, I believe, all their pieces back healthy in the secondary, had a week to rest. So not a good matchup. Not a great quarterback receiver connection. So I'm staying away from Lockett if possible. All right, we're going to get into a couple more busts. But first, consider hitting that like button if you appreciate our content. Thank you for doing so. All right, let's keep going, Chris. Give me another bust.
I'm going to say Devontae Booker will be a bust this week. I had him as a must start last week. He got 16 touches, which was the good news against the Rams. Didn't do a whole lot with him. This week, it's going to be bad for Devontae Booker because the Panthers, one of the best defenses against the run, really one of the best defenses in the NFL. And just like last week, which was a problem for him, you got to think game script is going to be against him again this week. Sure, he can catch a couple passes or a few passes to kind of save his day, but I just don't know what to expect from Devontae Booker at this point. I mean, yeah, he's going to be on the field and he will get the ball when they run it, but against this defense in negative game script, I know it's tough to sit Devontae Booker in week 7 because all the running backs are either hurt or on bye, but I think you got to sit Devontae Booker unless you're completely desperate in week 7.
Yeah, we expected better things from Booker last week. Didn't happen. The matchup was tough, but it's really not that much better, like you said. So hopefully you have a better option. Look, one of those other options, and we got a lot of questions on our Start Sit live show that we do every Saturday night. We got a lot of questions that were just straight up Booker or Herbert, right? Khalil Herbert from the Bears, suddenly the starter there with Damian Williams out, and Devontae Booker, suddenly a starter in New York. Well, hopefully you picked Herbert because Booker did almost nothing. Herbert had a huge game, his best, of course, of his short career. But it's a different story. You forget the past, look ahead. Going against Tampa Bay, I think you already know this because we've mentioned this every week. Arguably the best run defense in the league. So this is not a good matchup on paper. But also, I think there's a strong chance Damian Williams does come back because, again, he's still on the COVID list, but typically, it only takes a week and a half. It's too early to say, of course, exactly if he's going to play, but there's a good chance he does come back, which means Herbert doesn't own the backfield anymore. And of course, game script. I mean, if you're expecting the Bears to keep it close, yeah, maybe they can run the ball, but there's a good chance that they'll be down. So as much as we loved Herbert last week, you kind of have to fade him this week. Not an absolute must sit, but again, don't assume based on his last output that he's going to do the same. It's a totally different story. All right, guys, we're going to keep going with our bust, but also need to let you know that if you want to support us each and every month, you can do that by becoming a patron. Check out information in the link of the description below for our Patreon page. All the information is there. Just want to make sure you know that it's there. All right, let's keep going, Chris. Another bust.
I'm going to say Rob Gronkowski is going to bust. And I know there's a chance he may not play this week, but he's missed 3 weeks with that lung injury. It sounds like, he could have played last week if it wasn't the Thursday night game. So I expect him to be back. But he's going up against Chicago. Talked about it in our must start video. It's a Mike Evans week. Chicago actually very, very good at defending the tight end. I think we're going to see a lot of Mike Evans. We're going to see a little bit of Godwin and Antonio Brown. And we're not really going to see much of Gronk. And even if Gronk sits, don't start any Bucs tight end, right? Don't go out there and start O.J. Howard. Don't go start Cameron Brate. This is just a really bad matchup for the tight ends. I think it's going to be a wide receiver week for the Buccaneers. So if Gronk starts, I get it. You probably have to start Gronk if he plays because he's probably your best option. But just expect, lower expectations for Gronk. And if he doesn't play, don't go pick up one of these tight ends. Find somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely agree there. Don't rush out to start him just because he's playing doesn't mean he'll be super involved right away. And so a guy I've been kind of disappointed with all year, except for I think one really good week, but Tyler Boyd has just not really been startable in fantasy. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, Jamar Chase came on a lot sooner than I expected. I don't think anybody saw him, doing what he's done so far this early in the season. But also what we have to look at is the fact that it's a crowded receiver room, and we thought that they could support all three. But with Joe Mixon also actually staying healthy, just not enough targets to go around, right? And Chris, you've talked about this. The Bengals are playing at a slow pace. They're not running a ton of plays. And their defense actually isn't as bad as it was last year. So all that conspires to make Boyd just not that relevant. In the games where Higgins has played, right, where, it's been all three of those receivers on the field, Boyd hasn't seen more than 5 targets in that game. In the last 2 weeks with Higgins back, only a total of 8 targets the last 2 games. That's just not enough for a guy who really is pretty much volume dependent. So going against the Ravens, not a good matchup. I think you can definitely keep Boyd out of your lineups. All right. I think we have room to squeeze in one more bust apiece. Go ahead, Chris. The honors are yours.
I'm going to say both the Broncos running backs, Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, will bust this week against the Browns. The Browns are a funnel defense, meaning they're very good against the run and very bad against the pass. And if you watched our must-start wide receiver videos, we both talked about Courtland Sutton and Tim Patrick having potentially big games this week against the Browns, which means Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams will likely take a back seat. And, factor in that this is pretty much a 50-50 split down the middle. It's hard for either of these guys to really have a big week anyways because they're splitting the touches in this matchup. Just no way I can have either of these guys in my lineup for week 7.
Yeah, it's pretty irritating, to be honest, from a fantasy standpoint. Both talented running backs just eating into each other's productions. But it's funny if anybody saw on Twitter. Don't go ahead and tweet these things out just, too quickly, because somebody actually said that about waiting for Javonte Williams to take over the backfield. And Melvin Gordon actually tweeted at him and said, not so nice about how, he's still relevant. Anyways, I'll talk about a guy who suddenly is relevant, but I'm going to fade despite the fact he actually had a really good game last week. That's Alex Collins. Look, I know I was down on him last week, and he turned out to have actually a really good game. Did score a touchdown despite the fact the Steelers hadn't given up a touchdown to running backs. Went over 100 yards. The first half, it looked like exactly what I expected. He was shut down, doing nothing. The whole offense really didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, it's like the Steelers were surprised at the fact that Seattle tried to keep running the ball, and they just weren't ready for it. So credit to Alex Collins for running hard. But you should know that he has now a couple of injuries. He's kind of banged up, a glute injury, a hip thing. I don't know if it's going to keep him out for this week. I don't think it will. And they do need him because Chris Carson's still on IR. But it's also a really bad matchup. Look, I talk about Tampa Bay being maybe the best run defense in the league. New Orleans actually gives up the fewest yards per carry, less than 3 yards per carry. So again, it's a tough matchup. Like maybe Collins just fights through it and does what don't expect him to do and have another big game, but I'm not going to count on it. So I know there's slim pickings at running back this week, But if you do have a better option, I would rather roll with it than Collins. All right, so those are our busts for week 7. Let us know what you think. Hit us up with a comment here. Give us a like. As I already mentioned, you can support us on Patreon or just join the conversation for free in Discord. All that information is in the description below. Thanks for joining us, and as always, good luck.